things. And we also understood that there are, in the metaphorically, the conversation in Bhagavad Gita happens in kind of three levels, and we took it like a metaphor as a three-storied building. Arjuna currently is in the first level, which is the dharmic level, and the second level is the yogic level, and third level is the salvation or the moksha level. So when Arjuna was referring to I in all the things, when he was saying that I will feel sad, I will not feel happy, it is a sin and all. So the I that Arjuna was referring to the physical body. And Krishna, when he says in the next shloka that Natve Vaham Jatunasam Natvam Neme Janadipaha, he says that I was there, you were there, and everyone were there in the past, and we will also be there in the future. Then what is the point in grieving that we will not be there? Where is the point, or when was it that we were not there? So the second level, from the second level, the I or the identification of I refers to the Atman or the self. And that's what we saw in our video also, like how that self or which is explained as I refers to the self. So in continuation to that, we also understood that Atman is like electricity, as how electricity gives the bulb the expression of light. In the same way, only when the Atman comes into contact with the body, mind, or the intellect, it is when it can express life. When you say Atman is there everywhere, it's always there, and only with the contact of the instrument, it will be able to express. As how, even though electricity is there throughout in the wiring done in the wires everywhere, it cannot give light, it cannot express. To express, it needs an instrument. In the same way, Atman or the self cannot express itself, it needs instruments for expression, and it is the body, mind, and the intellect that we are using here to express ourselves in this material world. And we also understood that the three normal states are waking state, where we contact the external world knowingly, consciously; dream state, which is sleeping state, we sleep, our physical body is lying down, but still mind is active, it's engaged in dream. And in the sleep state, the mind is also at rest, the body is also at rest, but still we feel we are alive, or we experience that deep sleep as well. The experiencer is not the body, it's not the dream state, or it's not the deep sleep state. And we have told it is the consciousness or the self which is a part, or which is experiencing all these three states. It's not these three, but it is apart from the three, but experiencing all these three. So we ended off last week seeing this consciousness part. We will continue a bit more on understanding. Today's class is understanding of what is the self or consciousness that we are referring to here. And also, I think there was a question about, is really there a kind of rebirth or past lives or the next lives and all. The two things that Vedanta backs upon is the law of cause and effect, which brings us to the theory of reincarnation. And when we take the law of cause and effect and ask, like, is this really true, or is there rebirth and all? The rebirth or the past lives have been like it's a theory, so it is not something practically that we can see. But our spiritual scientists or our sages went through a immense kind of analysis by seeing the people, the births, deaths, and trying to analyze as what is the effect or what is the cause and how are the things functioning. And after a lot of analysis and experience that they gain through, they put forth a theory which is the karma theory or the law of cause and effect, which is a very near approximation of why things are happening in this universe, in this world. For many of the questions, if we go and ask in the modern scientific world, there are no answers for most of them. If you take the cases like child prodigies, a person is born intelligent. At 2 years of age, a person exhibits a child prodigy, and a person who might be born with a lot of illness or diseases, any kind of things. When we all scientifically know certain things, even science is not able to explain many of the things that are happening and says that it's all miracles, or they have no answer for that. But when we come to this Vedantic philosophy, the theory they give to the near approximation is the theory of karma, or the what we call it as the law of cause and effect. So we are here as an effect. If you think birth as an effect, the cause of a birth is the past lives karmas or whatever it is. That is the cause, and we are now the effect. So as an effect now, we will be the cause of future. And when we actually try to get convinced with this law of karma, one thing that it tells us very strictly is it's only the present that you have in your hands to create a future effect. If now you are born and this cause will lead you to a future effect, the only thing in your hand in the current cause is the present life. So be very cautious about your current actions, be mindful about the current actions, so that you could create a better effect for the future. So this is what is the theory that gives us a bit of kind of still a moral kind of stick, or a teacher taking a stick and standing before a student. It's like a moral driven thing that current life you have to act every moment mindfully. If not, whatever happens in your life is not because of anyone else, but it's just because of your past actions or the present actions. You are the architect of your life, your causes, your effects. So that is the theory of cause and effect and how we can relate to it. Throughout the Bhagavad Gita, if we don't believe in the law of cause and effect and the law of incarnation, progressing the things will not seem meaningful to us, because these philosophies are based on these two principles. So this is a 3 minutes.
Abhita.
Yeah.
You are saying that whatever is happening now is a result of the past karma, right?
It could be past karma, or it could also be the present. See, if you see in the current proverbs also, they say 10% of life is what is your destiny. 90% of it happens by the way you react to the current situation. So whatever it is said to be the effect of your own causes. It could be past or it could be present.
Okay, because the doubt is, if whatever is happening now is because of the past karma, then even the way we are thinking is because of the past karma, right? So to do a particular, see, whatever we are doing right now is the way, because of the way we are thinking.
Yes.
If that is going to come because of past karma, doesn't that mean that past is only designing the current? Doesn't that mean that only the past is designing the current? Then how can we design our future if it is so much of influence of the past in the present? Then how
That's what
can
we
we?
saw, that bridge, right? See, now you have come to the study of this. Yeah, as you said rightly, yeah, we call it as vasanas. Vasanas are the tendencies that we get because of our causal body. So at this, what they say is, at this stage, when you leave your body in this current life, at what stage your mind was, that stage continues in the next life as well. So your tendencies of what gunas were prominent in you, what kind of thought process you had, they influence the current life. But it doesn't mean that you cannot change or rewrite that vasanas. It takes a lot of conscious effort. Now, knowing the things, how do you transcend mentally, makes a remarkable progress in your mental transcendence, which will show effect in your next life.
Okay.
So now you are acting. We know that for us to not act in a mode of thinking, or sometimes we are brought up in certain patterns. Some of them are because of our vasanas, which we call as an innate tendencies, which we have acquired from the previous birth, and some of them are because of the rewiring that happened in our subconscious mind from our childhood. Both of them can easily, not easily, subconscious mind can be done to a certain extent easily, but vasanas can be overwritten. Vasanas can be totally changed. Like a person, we have also seen in our histories where a person is born murderer, changes into a saint, like Valmiki and all. So it can be changed, but it takes immense amount of effort.
Thanks,
That's why
Abhita.
we are giving this total utility. or we have the faculty to do that. And every situation that you are put into is the best conducive for your evolvement.
Okay.
Yeah.
It is consciousness.
Let me know you're able to listen here,
Yeah.
the sound. Okay. So this video is about what is consciousness.
Chaitanyam. The word is Chaitanyam in Sanskrit or Chit. Chaitanyam, Chit, these are the words used. And what he says is, there is a consciousness in you. This is Chaitanyam. And you have a mind. And you have a body. This consciousness shines in the mind. And through that, in the body, in all the organs of the body. And you feel this consciousness. This is the answer. Now the answer here is, the thing to be noted here is, the teacher presents consciousness in 5 aspects. There's 5 points you have to understand, appreciate. First of all, consciousness is not a part of your body or your mind. Consciousness is not a part of your body or your mind. It is apart from your body and mind. Here it's different from science, because modern science would say consciousness is a product of your body. Even your mind is a product of your body. Mind and consciousness all are products of the brain. That's what physiology would say today. But here the teacher says consciousness is apart from your mind and body. First point, it is not a part of your body. It's not a product of your body. Second point, it's apart, but it pervades and illumines the mind and body. Consciousness pervades and illumines the mind and body, enabling it to function. Third point, this consciousness is not limited by the mind and body. It exists apart from the mind and body also. It's not limited to it. It's not something here in this particular brain, in this part of the body. It's not limited by the body. Third, this consciousness is known, it is known in the functioning of the mind and body. Through the functioning of the mind and body, we can know consciousness, we can experience consciousness. And fifth, the last point to be appreciated is, without the mind and body, consciousness is still there, but it cannot be known. It's not experienced. Example, 5 points. I'll give you an example. There is light here from these tube lights. There is light here. Here is my hand. And light is being reflected from this hand. Okay, it's being reflected from this hand. The light which is being reflected from this hand, you can see here, the light being reflected from this hand, the light is not a part of this hand. It's not a product of this hand. Okay, first point. The second point is, it pervades the hand and illumines the hand. Third point is, I can understand the light. A third point is, it exists. It's not limited by the hand. Other than the hand also, it exists everywhere. And the fourth point is, it's by the reflection in this hand that I can understand the light. Just now here I cannot understand the light. But when I put my hand here and it shines, I can understand the light. I can experience the light when it is reflected. And the last point, very interesting, is if I remove the hand, the light is still there, but it's not experienced. Now it's experienced. Now it is not experienced.
So what here we are trying to understand is that the consciousness is everywhere. So the Atman here, whichever the Lord was referring to, can be taken as consciousness. And the Atman also in Bhagavad Gita is referred in 2 stages. Like some places it's referred to as Atma, they say as Paramatma, and we also have Jivatma. So Paramatma is in terms of the consciousness, it's the pure consciousness, and Jivatma is like the reflected consciousness. It is like the sun. When the sun shines, if there is a mirror, the sunlight falls on the mirror and the mirror reflects the light. So the sun is like the pure consciousness which is pervading entire universe, in the living objects, non-living things, everywhere, any part, because it's omnipresent. So when we say Brahman or whatever is the creator that we think about, so that single pure consciousness pervades the entire universe. But because the instruments needs to be there to experience, when this pure consciousness comes into contact with the mind, it starts to reflect the consciousness, like as how we see our face in the mirror. We are here, which is apart from the reflected image that is there in the mirror. Both are not the same. It is a reflection of our image. You can see your image in the mirror, but you cannot see yourself. So we cannot see that pure consciousness directly, but when we are operating in this world in terms of mind, body, and intellect, what gets that awareness or the consciousness is the reflected consciousness. So the pure consciousness is the subject, the Atman or the Paramatma or the Brahman, which we say is the subject, and all the other things that we are talking about are the objects. And the subject is clearly different from the object, and subject is always one. In simple example, when we say mind, we all say it's my mind, it's my body. And when you have a pet, what do you do? What do you say? If you have a dog with you, what do you say? Whose dog is it? If I ask, what will be your answer?
My dog.
Yeah, you say it's my dog. Suppose your dog has some issue and it starts scratching its ears. And when your dog is scratching, will you also scratch your ears because it is your dog?
No.
The same way, when we understand the concept of the pure consciousness and body, mind, and intellect being the objects for the subject, and the subject is different from the object, we have to understand to maintain a line of difference between I, which we identify here as the pure consciousness, and our mind, body, mind, and intellect. When we are able to establish that line of difference, we will not we will be able to control. When you think you are the mind, when you think you are the body, when you think you are your intellect, the amount of capacity you have to control it will be limited. But when you are apart from it, and when you are really apart and distinct from it, your ability to control your mind, your body will be more when you get into the correct understanding. So here we are trying to understand that the subject, which is the Atman, the owner of I. When we say I, the identification of I, which is the Atman, is different from the rest of the things. In one of the Upanishads, it is stated that if you take the example of a chariot, the Atman is like the owner of the chariot. The Buddhi or the intellect is the driver. The mind or like the reins or the horses. The sense organs are the horses that are pulling the chariot. The body is the chariot. So is the owner different from the chariot? From this picture, is the owner different from the chariot?
Yes.
Is the owner different from the driver? So
Yeah.
the owner is, yeah. So the owner is different from the driver. The owner is different from the mind. So when we say Atman here, if the chariot is taken as the body, our physical body, the owner still exists. So what happens when we end our life and move into another life? This chariot becomes some other chariot, but the owner of the chariot will still be there to continue the rest of the journey. And when will the journey end? We will see. So I was telling about Atman. Atman here refers to as pure consciousness in the broader term, like when we say Paramatma or Brahman, it is the pure consciousness that we are talking about here, like the sun shining. And when this pure consciousness comes into contact with Chitta, in yogic science, mind is not a simple science that we talk about the mind. It has four parts. One is subconscious mind, one is the reasoning mind, which is the intellect, which is the one is the active mind, which is the conscious mind, which is the feeling of emotions and all, but we are able to identify it on the front. And another is ego. And ego here refers to as ahamkara in Sanskrit, and it is not the general terms of ego which we say as having pride or something like that. The ego here refers to the identification of I. When you say who you are, to whom does you identify to? In the different stories, we have seen that the first storied person refers I to the physical body, and now when Lord Krishna speaks, he refers I to the Atman. So what are you representing I in your mind is the ego. And through this mind, our physical body functions. Our physical body cannot function without mind. Our physical body is the one that is perceiving and also acting. We call it as karmendriyas and jnanendriyas. Jnanendriyas are our sense organs and karmendriyas are our organs of action. So both of them function with the help of mind. And when we say mind, in our science, we refer to different things, but here the chitta or the yogic science mind refers to our subconscious mind, reasoning mind, ego, and also the active mind put together. What happens is the mind is considered like a mirror. So whenever we see ourselves in the mirror, we see the image of ourselves, which is the reflected image. And we are not the image in the mirror, meaning that both are not the same, but it is reflection of our own image. In the same way, whenever the pure consciousness contacts the mind, there is an automatic reflection that takes place. And there will be reflected consciousness because of the reflection happening through the mind. And when we now say we are aware, you are listening to the class now. So you are aware that you are listening to the class. So that awareness or that consciousness is happening because of the reflected consciousness. And what is the aim of our life? Through this reflected consciousness, we have to identify the pure consciousness. So here when we say this outer being, when we contact this world through the mind and the physical body, the external world, we are doing everything currently with our reflected consciousness. Through our reflected consciousness, when we internalize and delve deep to find who am I, and when you are able to realize that you are nothing but the divine being, or you are nothing but that pure consciousness, then the journey ends for the life, because the complete aim of the life is to realize your true self, which is nothing but the divine nature or the pure consciousness. So what happens when we realize? We become one with the pure consciousness and we become that unlimited, infinite thing. We just become one and part of this universe.
A small doubt here, Abhita.
Yeah.
So in the previous slide where in the chariot and Krishna and Arjuna are there, where you have explained, you have shared that Krishna is the Atman and Arjuna is the Buddhi or the driver, right? But in the chapter one end.
Yeah, this is no, this is not Krishna and Arjuna. This is in general.
Okay, because
Yeah,
in the last
this is from yeah. So the analogy that we take there for the internalization of the Krishna Arjuna Samvadam is different. This is in general from a different Upanishad. The driver here, the picture I have put is from Bhagavad Gita, but these people really doesn't refer to the exact Krishna and Arjuna.
Because you were saying that Krishna is the mind or the intellect, and Arjuna is actually the soul or the Atman.
Yes.
And the conversation between them. So whenever we have confusion between the heart and the mind, You were saying
Yes,
that.
correct.
So I got a
Yeah,
little
yeah.
confused.
No, that's why I didn't bring both their names here. This was like the owner and the driver.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, clear.
This is
Okay,
just a
thank you.
picture. Yeah, this is from a different Upanishad where they
Okay.
bring that Vedantic philosophy into the picture.
Okay, clear. And one more doubt, Abhita, in this slide which you are sharing
Uh-huh.
right now.
Uh,
So you're saying that pure consciousness,
uh.
about pure consciousness, that is reasoning. So does that mean concentration is pure consciousness? Because I'm in the class, I'm concentrating. So does that mean pure
No.
consciousness?
Pure consciousness is the real self, which is the ultimate reality. So, whatever we feel conscious or aware now is because of the reflected consciousness. It takes years together, or see, if you have realized the pure consciousness, that's all, that's the end of your life. That has, you just merge into the consciousness. You see, one thing is, if you feel that is this the pure consciousness, you're asking a question, is you are still working in terms of your mind. Pure
Okay.
consciousness is something to be realized. It cannot be felt because that is above the reality, meaning that it is above your physical body, subtle body. You have to transcend your mind, meaning that there will be no thought, there will be no question, there will be no answer, there will be nothing.
But
It's a,
the analogy that you had given about the mirror, like I stand in
Mhm,
front of the mirror and I see my reflection, if
mhm,
that is the concentration. So, for example, I'm seeing you in the class, I'm seeing what the slide in the class.
mhm.
So that is that reflected consciousness? Is that the reflected consciousness? And what is then pure consciousness?
That is what is the purpose of the life. The pure consciousness is something that cannot be explained. It doesn't have actually a term to explain because it is the ultimate reality which has to be felt. So I'm going to put you a video which will actually show you the difference between the pure consciousness and the reflected consciousness. And after that, if you have some more questions, I will try to answer.
Okay, thank you, Abhita.
Yeah, just a minute. I forgot to put the video.
Question is, what is Atma? Self. The materialist will say body is the self. Some people say the mind is the self. Most educated, sensitive, thinking people amongst us, we say, I am the person in the body. But Advaita Vedanta says consciousness is the self. But again, to understand it very clearly, it is not consciousness which we immediately think about awareness. Oh, I'm aware. So this must be, is this the ultimate reality of the universe? No. That's awareness already limited by the mind. That's looking at your face in a mirror. The mirror is the mind, and the face you see in the mirror is the consciousness already involved in the mind. But the original face, which is being reflected, that's original consciousness. Because if we get a sense of that, we'll see how tremendously distinct it is from everything else. It is not an object. The awareness which we feel right now, which you call Chetana, that awareness which we feel right now, that's also an object. Because you feel it. But what feels that awareness? Pure consciousness is reflected in the mind, and it becomes identified with the mind. The mind feels conscious. Mind feels lit up. Just like the moon at night. The moon is lit up. In fact, when we were kids, we studied luminous bodies in the sky, and we would say moon is a luminous body, which is strictly not true. It's a borrowed light. In the same way, the mind is strictly not conscious. It's an object of consciousness, but it feels conscious because of the reflection of consciousness in it. One of the terms used for reflection of consciousness in Vedanta is chidabhasa, reflected consciousness. Here he uses a different term, chit chaya, also means reflection or shadow of consciousness. Because of that, the mind is lit up. Sakshi, the witness consciousness, and chidabhasa, the reflected consciousness. Chit and chidabhasa, pure consciousness and reflected consciousness. What do these terms mean? First of all, the reflected consciousness, what it means is, right now, we are sitting and listening. If I ask you, are you aware? You ask yourself, am I aware? And the answer will come from inside. Yes, I'm aware. It could be I'm aware of the Swami speaking, if you're paying attention. It could be I'm aware of how long is this going to last, if you're not paying so much attention. It could be that I'm aware of my dream, if you're completely out of it and sleeping. If you're dropping off to sleep, you are in your dream world, but you are aware. That awareness is what is called reflected consciousness or reflected awareness. It's like, it's not the real awareness, it's not the real you. The reflected awareness is like, when you look at your face in the mirror, you see your face in the mirror. And supposing you've forgotten your original face and you think, that's who I am. That's not who you are. That's a reflection of your face. That's not the real face. That's a reflection in the mirror. That has really nothing to do with your face. But suppose I have forgotten my own face and I take the reflection to be my face. That's what has happened to us. We are really the witness consciousness. We don't understand that yet. We don't grasp that yet. But we see ourselves as the awareness we feel in the mind.
So taking the yogic approach then, if you calm your mind, I've heard people say that in a calm mind you can see a reflection of the self, of your true self. Do you agree with that?
In a calm mind, in any mind whatsoever.
Right.
The Vedantic approach is that consciousness is, why does the mind seem conscious? Right now the mind seems conscious. When you look at it, you feel conscious, right? What is that consciousness then? That's consciousness plus mind. Consciousness, the real self, is reflected in the mind. And that reflected consciousness is what we use for our empirical dealing. Talking, speaking, hearing, thinking, understanding. All these are conscious events. And that consciousness is a reflection of the real consciousness, which I am. So it doesn't require a calm mind also, even an active mind. Active mind, calm mind, consciousness is reflected in the mind. As long as the mind is there, it's like a mirror. Whenever you have a mirror, your face is going to get reflected. That's another beautiful example that Advaitins use. What's the difference between a reflected face and your real face? Reflected face means mirror, your face is there in the mirror. Your real face is here. That's the reflected face. But the reflected face has one advantage. You can see it. You can't see your real face. Right? You can only see a reflection of your real face. The reflection is seen. Why? Because the reflection is an object. You can see it different from you. But the real face is not an object. It is the real you. So that's a good example. Real consciousness or pure consciousness is a pure subject. And it is reflected in the mind. But what is reflected in the mind is not a pure self, pure consciousness. Yes. The reflected consciousness and the ego, they become identified. And he gives an example. A ball of iron in a blast furnace in a factory, it glows red hot. A ball of iron which is heated in a blast furnace in a factory, it glows red hot. So the heat, the fire element and the iron, they are identified. They seem to be one and the same. Exactly like that, reflected consciousness and the ego seem to be one and the same. They become completely identified. The connection between the ego and three things. We have ego connected to three things. One is consciousness, pure consciousness itself, the real you. The other one is the reflected consciousness in the mind. The ego always shines in the reflected consciousness. When you think right now, I, don't you feel I am aware? All the time you feel. The moment you think I, it's an aware I. It's a conscious I. It's an I shining in awareness. So the second thing with which the ego is connected is this reflected consciousness. And The third thing which with this the consciousness is connected, the ego is connected, is the body. So the ego, mentally draw a picture, ego, I, is connected with three things: reflected consciousness, body, pure consciousness. The connection between the I, ego, and reflected consciousness is natural, sahajam. It's like a mirror and your reflected face. Imagine your face, this face is the original consciousness. The mirror is the ego. When you put the mirror in front of the face, what happens in the mirror? There is a reflected face, right? If you have a mirror in front of your face, there is a reflected face. And this reflected face and the mirror, what kind of relation do they have? This reflected face and the mirror, what kind of relation do they have? They have a natural relation. Moment there is a mirror, there will naturally be a reflection. Your face will be reflected in the mirror. This mirror example is very good. Why? Because the ego functions as a mirror, the mind itself functions as a mirror, and consciousness is reflected in the mirror. You see, the interesting thing is, when you hold a mirror in front of yourself, what you see is the mirror and what you see is your reflected face. The original face is not seen. Correct? Your original face is not seen directly. What you see is a reflection. The mind functions in that way. The ego functions in that way. It reflects consciousness. So the awareness that we feel right now is like the reflected face. It's a reflected consciousness. We experience a reflected consciousness. We do not see ourselves as the original consciousness. That's what's happening.
So does this video explain your questions?
Yeah, Bita, it's very difficult to understand, but yeah.
This is totally difficult to understand because it's very, very, very abstract. And if you understand, it means that we are actually going towards the liberation, because this is, as said, a philosophy which abstract, which we need to take step by step, and that antahkarana, which we call as internalization, is needed to delve more into the depths of thing, because this is not understanding, but this is realization. That's why we say it's more of that spirituality is more of realizing, not understanding. It's more beyond the body, mind, and the intellect. So you need to feel, or it's not even feeling. When we say feel, it comes to the point of a mind again. It's actually to realize. So the thing that we understand from here is that when we say pure, that's why when we call human beings, every human being is divine. We say every human being is divine because every one of, not only human beings, but living things, non-living things, everything in this universe is pure consciousness. It's everywhere, because pure consciousness is everywhere. It's there in living beings, it's there in non-living beings also. In that sense, every one of us are divine. But at the same time, every one of us are unique. It's because the mind through which we are functioning, the main instrument through which we are contacting this world, the reflecting medium of the pure consciousness, is different for different people because of the interplay of the three gunas within us, the rajas, tamas, and sattva, because of the intermingling of the gunas and also our innate tendencies that we acquired, it is different. And that's why we say every individual, the main core of the life with each and every one of the living object is the same, but we are unique in the sense because of our reflecting medium. So however gross a person might behave, still that person is also operating through the divinity within him, the pure, but he has totally a complete wall because he is not even able to understand that he is a divine being. That's why his mental levels are to such a gross level.
Is this related to aura? So the shine or the light which you're saying, that which is there everywhere, the chaitanyam. If a person has more of sattva and less of others, is that why they call that person tejas, or is that why they call?
The aura is the energy body. So every one of us physically, when we go into yogic science or the dimensions of our bodies, when we go into the chakras and nadis, right? So the aura is nothing but your spiritual shine or your spiritual reflection. So however pure your mental transcendence and your mental state is, and you are in the realization to the towards the pure consciousness. So that is the aura which we call around us. It's like a magnetic field around us. It vibrates with our internal energies. Internally, the prana or the life goes as an electricity, and outside our body, it is like a magnetic field. It acts like a magnetic field. So when you have a magnetic field, you have a magnetic strength, right? The strength of your magnetism depends upon your internal energy levels, which we call as not the physical energy level, but the energy gained in the dimension of prana. The second
Sorry to
level
ask
of the
so many
dimension.
questions. Sorry to ask so many questions.
Yeah, no problem.
No, is this mindfulness which we keep listening, mindful, being mindful, is that anywhere related to consciousness, pure consciousness?
In a way related to, because when you have to be mindful, see, everything happens only with consciousness. Without consciousness, nothing will happen. So when you have to be mindful also, it's only through consciousness. When you have to be lethargic also, it's through your consciousness. So you cannot operate without the consciousness. It's like the sunlight.
Okay.
And when you ask the relationship between this, only when you are the consciousness that we say in terms of physical thing, like when we say I became unconscious, that is totally different. That is the aspect of mind and body that we are talking about, the passage of oxygen or the cut of oxygen to the mind. But this consciousness is something through which even when you become unconscious, you are alive, right? You are operating, your body is still functioning.
Right.
Yeah, it is that consciousness. And yeah, to be mindful, you need consciousness or awareness. So awareness or consciousness is like the light that lights up everything. That need not have any other thing to light it up. That is the light behind everything.
Okay, thank you, Abhita. So
Yeah.
it is not breathing, it is not the soul. It is something external.
It is something which every one of us has. It is something apart from all of these. All of these are the objects of consciousness, whereas this pure consciousness is the only witness or the subject which we call as Brahman.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, it is the witness. And all the other things, whenever we say the reflected consciousness is also an object of pure consciousness.
Thanks, Abhita.
Yeah. So here I'm just briefing you about the states of mind, because this is also very important for us to understand when we take the spiritual path. So we do a lot of things like meditation, all these things, but what is important here is our state of mind. In Patanjali Yoga Sutras, the states of mind are classified as 5 types. The first one is called a Kshipta state, which is called a monkey state. In this state, you are very restless. Your mind moves from one thought to other thought like a monkey jumping within the trees. You become so restless and very distractive very distractive in nature. And the second state of mind is called as Mudha, which is a lethargic, or they call it as a donkey state. It means it's a very lethargic, and the mind doesn't the mind doesn't want any kind of effort to be put in to act in any way. It just wants to be lazy. And the third state is a Vikshipta state. It's the state most of us are fit in. This butterfly state is like sometimes when you like a work, you focus on that work, and once that is done and you do something which you don't like, then your thoughts, you do the work, but still your mind goes out like a butterfly. It keeps on wandering with other thoughts. And again, when you have a work that you like, then again your mind comes back to that work. So this is called a Vikshipta state, like how a butterfly comes to a flower, sucks the nectar, and after that what it will do, it will keep on flying. So whenever it sees a flower and it wants to suck nectar, it will come there and drink. So that is the state of the butterfly. And Ekagra state is called a single point focus, which is concentrated mind but on a single thought. So if you are doing one thing, you are 100% into it. And Niruddha state is called a mastered or restrained state, where you have no thought but totally focused on yourself. So the last state is the state which we call it as meditative state. And to reach this is the actual state of mind with which we need to sit into at least the Ekagra state is the state basis for sitting it into meditation. Currently, when we sit and think of closing our eyes and say it as meditation, it is not the actual meditation which dhyanam, which the yoga prescribes. The thing that we are doing is only relaxation. But the prerequisite for the actual dhyana is to be already in the ekagra state. So it doesn't mean that you have to always sit. Even niruddha state is being mastered by many of the saintly people. Like if you take the people like Ramana Maharshi and all, they are always in niruddha state, meaning they always in the their mind is always pulled inwards, but still they act in the world. Because they have the body, they just act in the world for the sake of the world, but nothing for their self. They have completely realized the self. This is the self-realized state where your mind completely gets restrained in yourself, meaning you know the reality and your mind never goes externally seeking anything. So whenever you are contacting the external world, it is only for the sake of acting, and that act has nothing to do with your mental satisfaction or increasing or reducing the levels of happiness. You will be at complete ecstasy and bliss when your state of mind is in niruddha. So these 5 states are very important to understand because we keep on moving between these states, and to master the ekagra state, we do a lot of sadhanas. Even the chanting that we do or any kind of devotional things that we do is to take our mind to a single point focus or the ekagra state. Why I am explaining this is relevant in the section of this, where if you see the complete purpose of our life is to realize this yellow color one is the pure consciousness. So when as I said, like what is the purpose of the life? They say the purpose of the life is to realize the ultimate reality. And how are we to realize? In yoga, they prescribe as Ashtanga yoga. I'm not sure if you have heard. There are certain kind of practices that we do, which they call it 8-limbed yoga or Ashtanga yoga. And when we do and master each of them, we will be moving backwards from our gross body level and go inside to a stage of self-realization. So we have something like yamas, niyamas, asanas, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and the final thing is samadhi. And if you see here, why do we do yama, niyama, and asanas? Is to actually overcome the troubles that we face in the states of Muda and Kshipta. So I showed you the 5 states of mind. So if your mind is more of a Muda, which is lethargic, and which is Kshipta, like the monkey mind, more of a restless mind, if you have to overcome it, you have to do with yamas, niyamas, and asanas or pranayama. Because pranayama also calms down your mind, relaxes your mind. And when you relax your mind, you become a bit better and your mind will not be wandering here and there. And dharana is a single pointed focus. Concentration is like chanting or any kind of devotional things, keeping a single thought or a single person in mind, that is called as dharana. So when you start doing dharana, you are putting an effort to overcome your vikshipta mind, which is a butterfly mind, which is sometimes focusing, which is not sometimes focusing. You are trying to bring back its focus onto a single pointed thought by practicing dharana. And when you master dharana, you will move into the state of dhyana. And when you are sitting for dhyana, your mind becomes from ekagra, it will move into niruddha state. It's all theoretical here, but these are very important to note because we need to understand why we are doing it. Like we do yoga, we do pranayama and all. It's very important to understand what is the underlying reason for doing this. So it is the pure consciousness or the self which is expressing through the 3 instruments, which is our body, mind, and intellect. And through the body, we perceive and we act. Through the mind, we feel. Through the intellect, we think and we contemplate. So it is the Atman who is acting as who is an actor or a perceiver, who is also a feeler, who is also a thinker or a contemplator when it's operating through that particular instruments. So through our body, we are identified as a physical personality. Through our feeling, we are identified with our emotional personality. And intellect in the human beings is identified as two. One is the normal reasoning intellect. When we contact with the external world, we think, we reason, we logic. So that is called as the gross intellect. And through the gross intellect, we are defined as intellectual personality. And when we contemplate, this is the subtle intellect which we use to realize the truth or to go into the inward journey of internalization. So when you don't contact the external world, when you contact the internal world, you are a contemplator. And when you contemplate, that is the spiritual path you are taking, and that defines your spiritual personality. For all the thing, it is the self that is lighting up to do any of our activities. And this is the disciplines that I was saying. And yoga, we have understood it from the first class. Yuj means to unite. And what does yoga helps us to do? It brings us to the union. What is that we are going to unite with? You are going to unite with the reality, which is the right identification of the self. That is, you are nothing but that ultimate truth, which is the pure consciousness. And these circles or these 8 angas or the limbs of yoga, which is that Ashtanga, need not be followed sequentially. You can carry out them and try to develop them at the same time also. But the basis is the first 5 deal with the external world and the next 3 deal with the internal world, like your internalization or the self. And yamas and niyamas are very, very important in the sense we all might be following it, not knowing it as a yama. Yama is nothing but the morals or ethics that our grandparents or parents used to teach us, like be kind, don't tell lies, don't steal, eat everything in moderation, be generous, express gratitude. So all these ethics and morals are nothing but yamas. Yamas is the thing that you give it to the external world, and niyamas are self-disciplines. Waking up on time, sleeping early, eating on time, eating in moderation. So whatever for your internal body that you do, it is bringing in harmony to your body. They are all called as niyamas. And asanas are the postures of yoga that we do. And when we do the practice of asanas, what will happen? Physically, you will be flexible. Physically, you will be stable. You will have a good physical health. And when it comes to pranayama, it is the breath control, or it is the regulated breathing that we do, which physically also you derive many benefits, and mentally also you derive many benefits. And it also acts as a bridge between the mind, body, and soul. And pratyahara is when you are a bit involved in all these yamas, niyamas. When you do yama and niyama properly, right, your mind gets regulated to certain acts when you are actually acting the right ways, the moral ways, and you also have a bit of self-discipline and a physical fitness. You will automatically, your mind will be in a very good position, and your success rate will also be more because you will have a greater potential from within, which you can tap. It could be your intelligence, it could be in any walk of your life. It's not just for people who wants to gain samadhi, but following yamas, niyamas, asanas, pranayama will help us great deal in getting success in our lives, in any walk of our life, because it makes you do your best at any point of time because of the mental state that you will be in. And pratyahara is a phase where you understand about the reality and try to withdraw your senses from the external world, meaning that your thoughts, instead of always attributing that happiness lies in the external world, or this is the reason for happiness, or external world has everything, and understanding the truth that the happiness lies within. And what is the real source of happiness? That is the pratyahara, where you withdraw your senses from the external world and start pointing it inwards to understand your internal self. Dharana is to get the concentration of the mind, which is the state of ekagra. And in dharana, it could be japa, it could be yajna, whatever form of prayers that we follow or anything that we follow is dharana, where because we are trying to concentrate our mind on a single thought. It could be in the name of God, it could be in the name of chant, or it could be in the form of anything. But it is a single pointed, focused activity that we do, internal, but not for the external, but for internal thing, which we do is called dharana. And dharana leads to dhyana, which is the meditative absorption or your complete uh, involvement in yourself and understanding yourself. And finally, dhyana leads us to union or integration, which we call it as samadhi. So the dharana, dhyana, samadhi seems to be very far from our understanding in this current point of time where we start with. But having a holistic view of what is the purpose of life, it's always good for us to always tap on the yamas, niyamas, asanas, and pranayamas, and a bit of pratyahara, at least to understand that we are the source of our happiness, and it's not necessary for us to seek happiness from outside. And when we tap, or when we are the blissful beings, that kind of affirmations and that kind of feeling within us will actually make our mental state better and better by not actually taking the experiences in a different way. Then you will be able to take the experiences in the right way, because you understand how the things work and who is the reason for being what, and from where you are deriving your source of happiness. And Dr. B.K.S. Iyengar says that yamas and niyamas act as golden keys to unlock the spiritual gates. And it's very true. Yamas and niyamas are very, very important. If you are ethical, if you act morally, and if you are self-disciplined, you tap maximum of your potential out. You can tap maximum of your potential out, because your physical body also works at its optimum, and your mind also will be stabilized, and your intellect functions at its best. Any questions?
Yeah, Abhita,
Yeah.
I want to ask, can you give some example of pratyahar, how to withdrawal of senses you have written? So can you,
Pratyahara, like in the yogic science, there are a lot of things, but it's actually training your mind when you grow on spiritually, right? It's like training your mind to understand that externally there are the happiness. When you understand that the pure consciousness is the source of happiness, and when you gain the source of happiness from your pure consciousness, you will not seek happiness. For example, you like something and that made you very happy. So what will you feel? Okay, you like to drink. I'll tell you a small example. Like I like to drink tea. So I drank tea and that made me feel very happy. Then what will I do? Once I have once I drank tea, I felt happy, and I attribute that my happiness is derived from the cup of tea I drank. I am attributing my happiness to external object. But what happens internally is when I felt happy, my mind actually became a bit relaxed, and the consciousness or that happiness, the source of bliss which is within us, which is the pure consciousness, shines, and that happiness is reflected in our mind, which we attribute to other objects. So if you say pratyahara is not like a practice like asana, it is more of a mind game that you have to do. As you say asana and pranayama, we can say that you sit in this posture or do this yasana. But pratyahara, dharana, and dhyana are internal tools, which means you have to make your mind work towards that. It's not done by the physical body.
no, I mean, that is confusing. Na? Withdrawal of senses means,
Withdrawal of senses means your mind. See, what is the thing for the senses? When will your sense act? Which is the master of your five senses? It is the mind. When you say withdrawal of senses, you are withdrawing your mind from the understanding that external world is everything. So you're withdrawing yourself from the external world's thought, and you're trying to internalize the thoughts of finding who you are. You are not thinking about any external object. You are thinking about who you are. It could be in any form.
okay.
Yeah, but here nothing to do with your physical body. You can be anywhere. Pratyahara can be done when you are working, when you are active, wherever you are. But it is just the where your mind is focusing to, or where your mind, your thought. When we say thought, where is that thought pointing to? Is that thought pointing to an external object, or that thought is pointing to your internal self?
It means that it is a withdrawal of senses means that you are
Mind.
not always mind is experiencing the external things and you are getting gratification from the external things, you should be not having those and should be seeing
It
internally.
is like realization that the gratification is coming from within and not from external things.
Correct, correct.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So when we say, we will in second chapter also, we have a beautiful understanding of this withdrawal of senses. There are few shlokas which Bhagavan says how we can do this when we are in the midst of this world. So we will understand like how, like the example that they give us, like the tortoise. See the tortoise, how does it move? It has its limbs. It's moving on the, when it senses a danger, what does it do? It withdraws all its limbs into the shell and becomes so strong that nothing can break it. In the same way, we act in the world, and whenever we are acting, we also have to be like tortoise to withdraw our senses, meaning that how it withdraws the lens, we have to withdraw our senses when it is not necessary.
Correct.
In the sense, you are going on a way from place A to place B. In between, you see a lot of things which your mind wants to go, stop, and do something there. But if you are practicing pratyahara or the withdrawal of senses, you will have that self-control. It could be in a way said as a self-control. Like you focus on your goal and just progress towards it. You are not going to deviate from your goal, even though there are things that are more attractive to your mind.
Yeah, yeah. You should withdraw your sense to that attractive thing and which is giving you satisfaction otherwise. But
Yeah.
you should try to have a practice of withdrawing your senses from that external. Yes,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I know it is total of abstract concepts, but without understanding it clearly, I thought that progressing the next shlokas or the next part of it might not be very meaningful if we don't understanding the basic things correctly. It takes some time. Yeah, we will again and again revisit these when we go through the second chapter, and when we talk about the niyamas or the